If you keep falling for people who you have to fix, or for relationships where you end up playing parent instead of partner, and no matter how many times you swear that you'll choose differently next time, you end up in the same place. This is probably not random. In this video, I want to talk about why the caretaker role that you learned in childhood makes you so vulnerable to addictive love patterns, and why chaotic and unstable and broken partners can feel like chemistry to you instead of like a red flag. Hi, I'm Madalena, and this is You Reclaimed. Around here, we spend a lot of time talking about how complex trauma shapes the way we do love and the way we do relationships, why we get stuck in painful dynamics, and how we can start choosing something else without losing our capacity to care. Very quickly, just so that we're on the same page. When I say caretaker or enabler, I'm talking about the person who is quietly holding everything together around someone who isn't really functioning. So why is this role of the caretaker so vulnerable to being addicted to certain kinds of relationships that allow you to play out this role? Because when you grow up like this, your nervous system learns a very powerful fundamental rule. Love is earned through disproportionate sacrifice. Sacrifice itself is not the problem. Any healthy relationship involves some sacrifice. It's part of giving to each other and of taking care of another person. The distortion that complex trauma causes is this. For me specifically, as the caretaker, love means that I am the one absorbing most of the cost. That means I carry more of the burden, I sacrifice more, I fix more, I tolerate more. That's just how it has to be. So as an adult, when you move into romantic relationships, you automatically bring this script along with you. And now you are drawn almost magnetically to people who are not fully responsible for themselves. People who maybe never had to grow up or never wanted to. People who need help managing their life. They might feel a little bit lost or chaotic in their own purpose, their direction, their day-to-day functioning even. You can end up connecting in this way to emotionally fragile or to very intense people who have a hard time regulating their own emotions and who constantly need someone else to help them calm down, to help them think clearly, to help them feel stable. And you slip into these connections because these are the connections that feel right to you. These are the kinds of people who need you to clean up something for them, to remind them of things, to help contain their emotions that are too big for them to hold on their own. On top of that, different attachment styles can shape the way this looks. If you lean anxious, you may believe that this is the only way to secure love anyway. So this is a very natural path for you. If I'm indispensable to you, you'll be less likely to leave, even if you want to. So you make yourself indispensable. You're also more likely to talk about your frustrations in being in this role if you're anxious, because your primary concern in relationships is actually getting your own needs met in the relationship. So once you start to feel resentful and unhappy, you're much more likely to let it out in bursts. If I'm doing so much for you, why can't you show up for me? This can turn into a lot of bickering and back and forth and even fighting over exactly that dynamic. I'm giving so much and you're giving nothing back. And because this pattern is so common, a lot of people who naturally slip into the caretaker role end up in long-term relationships or marriages to someone who very comfortably lives on the other side of that dynamic. That other side is the dependent partner or the under-functioning partner. The person who is quite happy consciously or very often unconsciously to be taken care of. They rely on you to remember things, to clean up after them, to regulate them, to keep life running smoothly. And without even meaning to, you end up in this very fixed pairing. One person overfunctions and caretakes, and the other chronically underfunctions. And a lot of couples spend years, even decades, locked into this exact pattern. If, however, you lean avoidant, you may end up using this caretaker role to avoid your own inner world. A chaotic or needy partner keeps all the focus on them, which on some level you prefer anyway. It gives you a way not to feel your own loneliness, to feel your own grief, to feel your own fear, and your own emotions overall. But because your avoidance strategy is to avoid your own emotions, you're far less likely to talk about your resentments out loud. You're more likely to just bury it and carry on until it one day turns into, I've mysteriously fallen out of love. So each of these attachment styles can find a way to slip into the caretaker role and to have it quietly serve the attachment patterns that are already living underneath the surface. Now, let's zoom in specifically to romantic relationships and to love addiction patterns. In this caretaker role, you choose partners who are not fully responsible for themselves. These are usually the kinds of people who can be messy with money, messy with work, messy with their own emotions, their own boundaries, or all of the above combined. And they give off an energy of needing help to keep their life together or to run their life at all. You're also very susceptible to love bombing. Because you've spent so much of your life serving other people, you're starving to be really seen by another person and to be appreciated for anything that you yourself have to offer. So when someone comes in with intense focus on you, it can feel like water in the desert because you've never had that kind of attention. Unfortunately, this means that you can easily end up serving abusive or narcissistic partners, not just mildly incapable ones. You can end up rationalizing the behavior of abusers or narcissists because you say things to yourself like, oh, they've been through so much, or no one else understands them the way I do, and no one can take care of them the way I can. That kind of energy toward people who, to other people, are very clearly not safe to be around. And for a lot of you, this isn't random at all. If you grew up in a home where there was addiction, actual addiction to substances, and you watched one parent in the enabler role holding everything together around the addict, it's very likely that you can end up in that same role yourself in your adult relationships. So you may end up finding yourself involved with alcoholics or other addicts who need enabling, because this is a role that you grew up watching and you understand it so well. It's one that you recognize and that feels almost normal to you, even if you know with your conscious mind that this is not what you want. What's actually taking place is that other people see addicts or alcoholics or people who suffer from other types of addictions, and they pull away very quickly. That caretaker role isn't familiar to them. They don't have a soft spot for it psychologically and emotionally. But because you do, it feels acceptable to you in a way that it does not feel acceptable to other people. It feels like something that you can handle and almost something that you expect. And you do this because you are drawn to people who need your rescue, who need to be rescued from themselves, who need to be rescued from the damage that they do to their own lives, who need to be rescued from addiction, from depression, from self-sabotage, or from the consequences of their own choices. So much of your sense of identity is wrapped around this role that it's very hard to leave relationships where you get to play it out. And it's very hard to tolerate being in a relationship where you don't have to caretake because, well, what else are you there for? You don't really know another way to engage in a romantic relationship. On a deeper level, you might not believe that you are worthy of a healed, stable, emotionally available partner who can handle their own life on their own and still has enough capacity left to give back to you. Because the idea of being truly cared for by someone competent doesn't feel comfortable. It doesn't feel safe. It feels like this kind of person might, in a way, expose you, or that being cared for by someone else means that you somehow are weaker, that you're taking a lower position in the relationship where you're not the capable one. You're not the person who knows how everything should go and should be done. So you stay in relationships where you're half partner and half parent to the other person. And somewhere inside, you're actually collapsing because this is not an easy role to take on. And it's a role that leaves you completely depleted and uncared for. let's talk about why it's really hard to step out of relationships where you're the caretaker, or to step away from looking for these kinds of relationships that allow you to play out this role. For the caretaker enabler, there's usually a very specific cycle that repeats itself over and over. And from the inside, it doesn't feel like a pattern. It just feels like this last relationship went wrong, or whatever I'm currently in is going wrong. It's going downhill. And then the next one goes wrong too. And maybe you just haven't met the right person yet. That's the story you tell yourself. That's the story we all tell ourselves. But let me describe the pattern to you and see if you recognize yourself in it, because I've watched it play out in real time. In the beginning, the high of the relationship is usually the beginning of the relationship itself. The other person is lacking in some way, whether they're emotionally unstable, they're an addict, they're jobless, or they just really, really need you in some way to care for them. And if you grew up in a home with addiction or abuse, that kind of connection feels really natural. So in the beginning, everything feels fantastic. It feels intense and romantic and meant to be. Why? Because the role of the caretaker and the role of the dependent partner click together. And they click together so smoothly because that fit between the over-functioning partner and the under-functioning partner creates a kind of chemistry and intensity that can easily be mistaken for deep compatibility. Therapists sometimes call this an over-functioning, under-functioning dynamic, or a kind of codependent caretaker-dependent pattern. It sounds very clinical, but what it really means is one person quietly does too much and the other quietly does too little. And both people get used to it. But what happens as time goes on? Something else becomes obvious. It becomes obvious to you that the other person is actually using you to do life in a lot of ways. They rely on you to clean the house, to do the groceries, to manage the practical stuff, to plan all the dates, to initiate any kind of social life, to organize time with friends, to do anything outside of the home. If you don't take initiative, nothing really happens. If you don't plan it, it just doesn't get done. And the other person often doesn't seem to mind and doesn't seem to notice because they're not about to do it anyway. And at this point, this setup begins to make you really unhappy. You start to feel unsatisfied in the relationship, like you've chosen another bad partner. And if you're not conscious yet that you keep living out the same pattern, what you may tell yourself is that the romance has died. My partner is not being romantic anymore, is not paying attention to me. They're not loving me in the way I want to be loved, and I don't feel cared for. And your brain automatically looks back at the beginning and thinks, I need that feeling again. I need that early intensity and the chemistry and the passion. That's what love is supposed to feel like. I guess this relationship has just played itself out. Some people do start to suspect that there's a deeper pattern here, but even then, it's very hard to see just how much the caretaker role itself is driving the whole cycle. What's happening in a lot of these relationships with this dynamic is that you're confusing the activation of this caretaker role with romance and chemistry and compatibility. That early intensity you miss isn't just we were so in love. It's the feeling of sliding into that old familiar position of you're broken, you really need me, and this is what I do, this is who I am anyway. It feels perfect. And then when it becomes exhausting to live like that, when you're doing all of the emotional and practical living of life for two people, you eventually can't take it anymore. You're depleted, you're often furious, you're heartbroken, and you try to find ways to step out of the relationship. But instead of seeing the pattern, a lot of people in this role will tell themselves, this person just wasn't right. I picked another wrong partner. I need a better partner, a better match. So they go on looking for romance in a lighter, fresher connection that hasn't already burdened them and doesn't feel so heavy at the start. And they tell themselves they're looking for real chemistry or for someone who's really right for me. But what they're looking for is the beginning of that pattern, which is the part that feels good. And if this is you, you might step into the next relationship, but you're in the same role. You're just playing out the beginning of the same role that feels good to you. And eventually you reach the same point of exhaustion, at which point you may very well decide again that the romance is gone and now you need a new partner. That's why you can feel like you're constantly searching for the next relationship that will be more compatible or better than the last one, and yet somehow you always end up in the same place. It's not that you're unlucky in love. It's that the caretaker-dependent dynamic itself has become the thing that feels like chemistry in your body. And that's what makes these relationships feel so compelling and so hard to disengage from once you've really clicked into these complementary roles. So how do you even break this pattern of choosing adult partners in this way? I'm not going to pretend that you can unwind a lifetime of caretaking in one video, but I do want to give you a few first steps that will start to crack this pattern from the inside so that at least you can see how your relationships are in many ways predictable. And I don't mean predictable in a shaming way, as in you should know better. It's not about knowing better, because just like with limerence, there is a real pattern underneath that you act out unconsciously. And once you're able to see the machinery underneath everything, you can start to work with it. So understanding isn't everything. You can absolutely understand something and still not act on it, but understanding has to be a first step. You can't change things that you can't see. Screen for partners, not projects. This is especially important if you're dating and you're not already married or you're not already in a long-term relationship. Before you fall in love with someone or you get deeply involved emotionally with someone's potential, especially with someone's potential, you really have to ask yourself, if I completely stop caretaking tomorrow, if I stepped out of this role altogether, I don't remind my partner what they have to do, I don't remind them how to take care of themselves, I don't do things for them, I don't rescue them from their own actions or lack of actions, would there still be a relationship here? Would this person still love me if I didn't do all of that for them? And just as importantly, would I actually want to be with them? Would I still love them if I wasn't in that role in their life? So, does this person handle basic adult life on their own, even imperfectly? No one is asking us to be completely responsible and on top of everything at all times. But being so irresponsible that your partner has to carry everything is also not reasonable in a relationship between two adults. So, ask yourself, do I feel pulled toward this particular person in an attempt to fix something about them? And what is that thing that I'm trying to fix? Are they an addict? Are they chronically jobless? Are they technically homeless? Is there anything here that could indicate that I'm about to step into this caretaker role again? Of course, you can help people get a job. You can help someone stabilize their life and get back on their feet. People help each other out every day. The question is not, am I allowed to help? The question is, do I want to get locked into this dynamic with this particular person, or with anyone for that matter? Do I want this to be my relational pattern for the rest of my life? So you're looking for partners who are at least aware of their own issues and their own limitations, taking responsibility for most of the things in their own life that need to be taken responsibility for, partners who are capable of giving to you emotionally as well as receiving your emotional support. That shift from you acting as someone's savior to you acting as a mutual partner who also expects something back is a huge part of breaking this cycle. If you recognize yourself in this caretaker role in your love life specifically, please keep in mind that you did not end up here because you're weak or you're foolish. You ended up here because very early on you were streamlined into this role by the family you grew up in. And you learned to earn love and stability by caring more than your fair share. Breaking this pattern doesn't mean that you suddenly abandon everyone in your life or that you stop being deeply caring and empathic, which you probably are. It doesn't mean you stop helping or that you never sacrifice for anyone again. It only means that you stop abandoning yourself in the process, because losing yourself like that doesn't actually lead you to satisfying relationships.